Well, I mean, if I see a didgeridoo, I turn the opposite way and start running. Yeah. That's it.
Welcome to 1001 Album Complaints, the show where lifelong friends, musicians, and all-around nitpicky nerds get together to tell the backstory on some of the most influential albums of all time, as chronicled in Robert Dimery's book, 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. Now, if you don't know today's album super well or not at all, no worries. We're going to guide you through it with lots of song clips while we dive into the backstory of this artist and this album. And along the way, we're going to be breaking these songs down musically. I'm using that term loosely in this case. We're going to be citing various hot takes. We're going to be joking about the artist as well as at each other's expense. And we're going to be offering our collective wisdom gained from decades of recording and performing as musicians. And at the end of all that, we're going to vote on whether this album is really a must-listen before you die. Now, I must warn you that we came here to learn, but mostly to laugh and have a jolly good time. We are musicians ourselves. We do understand how difficult it is to make truly great art, and we come from a place of love and respect for the craft. But we also enjoy complaining, as the title of our show suggests. So, bottom line is there's no sacred cows here. We shall not be treating this artist or this album with any particular reverence. Superfans, you have been warned. My name is Rob. I've been playing, writing, and recording music since I was a teenager, and I've been critiquing every nuance of the records I love even longer. And tonight, we are covering an album that caused Pitchfork's sage critic to opine that this album's creator was to this new breed of ambient and electronic music what Babe Ruth was to baseball.
Wow. Pretty nice.
I'm, of course, speaking about Aphex Twin's selected ambient works, 85 to 92. Now, just to get us all situated here, we're going to play a clip from the opening track, which is also the most played on Spotify. It's spelled X-Tal, but I believe it's intended to be pronounced Crystal. Okay, now you have a sense of what we've been subjecting ourselves to all week. We are going to introduce our panel of complainers for the evening with a pithy, snarky, mean tweet-length review, and I'm going to throw the mic first to Tom.
Oh, I'm sorry. I fell asleep trying to catch up on listening to this album one more time before the show started. Good Lord. All right, well, here's my tweet-length review. Have you ever boarded a plane and then had it push off from the gate, and then it just kind of sits there for a while, and eventually they tow you back to the gate and they cancel the flight? This album is kind of like that. It's completely pointless, but somehow takes over an hour, and in the end, I am left wondering why I continue to engage with society.
Nice. I'm going to keep this moving around the room. Next up is a very special guest who's going to get an introduction shortly, but we're going to throw it next to James.
Hi, everybody. For better or for worse, this record and Aphex Twin's work in general changed the way we think about things. And I would say, like, reality in general is a really difficult way of sort of looking at that, but definitely electronic music.
Change the way we think about reality. Interesting take, James. We're gonna introduce James properly momentarily when we finish our tweets. Let's keep this rolling. Let's throw it next to Marty.
Oh, hey. That was a very academic review there, James. Some music you listen to while driving at night or on a rainy day. Some music you listen to while working out or while making love. And then there's this. Music you are forced to listen to because you have to discuss it on a podcast.
Yeah, that's absolutely accurate.
Yeah. And let's keep it moving here. Next up, we have Phil.
So, Marty, my tweet, I think, maybe addresses some of your comments, some of your concerns. Sometimes you own an art gallery and you need music you can ignore while you sell art. Sometimes you walk into a furniture showroom, you're looking for a handsome new leather chair with a standalone ottoman, and that's Aphex Twin.
Wow. It promises to be a contentious one tonight, dear audience. My name is Rob, and my tweet length review is, it's a bit funny that this genre has been coined intelligent dance music by critics and fans alike, since this album can only possibly be appealing to simple-minded who live with their parents and enough to see that what the
Ooh.
Wow. There we go. Yeah.
Before we get into general impressions, and I am very excited to discuss the record with you all tonight, let's give a proper introduction. Joining us tonight to help us make some sense of these rhythmic squelching and intermittent hi-hat patterns is a real live ambient musician. His group Synthesizer and their debut album Terminal Chillness is due out later this year. Welcome our old friend, original member of the Chop Live band, and complete keyboard pervert, James.
What's up, James? What's up, buddy?
I'm sitting right now in front of a wall of keyboards. Right. But I even turned off Blur My Background, which I usually use to hide my shame, just to like out myself.
And that's not the only kind of pervert he is.
I love there's so many keyboards in the background. Probably not a single one of them makes a piano sound.
Oh, no, absolutely not. Are you kidding?
Right?
How would I be able to churn out technological squelchings with a piano?
Let's segue. James, so excited to have you here as possible defender.
Yeah, right.
To this music that is clearly not really within our collective wheelhouses. So I am excited to have you join the conversation. I asked you to come on this podcast very intentionally for that reason. But let's segue into some general impressions. And I would love to hear from Marty first.
As kind of my shit talking has already started, I will say that, well, two things. This seems like an album that like nobody probably really asked for. It's just a kind of a collection of like a bunch of songs. But I will say it's rather impressive from what I understand that some of these were written and recorded at like 13 and 14 years old. And if I were to think back at what I was doing at 13, 14 years old, it was like obsessing on going to see like live WWF wrestling. James is doing some hand gestures there, and that probably hadn't even started yet at that age, you know?
I was going to say, there was definitely some rhythmic squelching going on.
Yeah, right. I definitely wasn't sitting in my basement and like cranking out bangers on like techno bangers.
Yeah,
you know?
definitely nothing I did at that point has stood the test of time.
Yeah, but neither was Aphex Twin. He wasn't cranking up
I
bangers.
guess not.
Listen, I also got really high when I was a teenager and made a lot of really shitty, pointless music. I just had the taste to not subject anyone else to it. One of my abandoned tweet length reviews is this is Enya for assholes. And I have been settling on this theory. And this is going to sound a little radical at first, but I think that Aphex Twin is the British Kid Rock. In that Kid Rock embodies everything that is the worst about America, with the fucking monster trucks and guns and the braggadocio. Aphex Twin is everything that is the worst about the UK. It's this pretentious bullshit. Oh, you just don't get it. This is so fucking high-minded. And I know that there's no words in there basically, but still, I feel like that's the message that comes across. And it has the intensity of like a fucking afternoon nap. And I hated this week. And this music sucks, and you suck for liking it, anyone who's listening.
Let me play against that just slightly.
Dial it back a little from there.
I actually came away with an overall positive feeling on the listening experience. It's not for active listening, as Phil mentioned in his tweet. It is definitely background music. It is soundtrack music. It's just about textures and vibes, and it doesn't conform to any of our predetermined notions of what makes for good songs or good music. So I'm in the same camp as you guys in that regard. but I did find it overall relaxing, soothing. My main complaint about it is that there feels like there's minimal cohesiveness here, maybe no cohesiveness whatsoever.
You mean like song to song?
Yeah, it's calling itself ambient, but there's a fair amount of, there's a lack of internal consistency to the vibe of the tracks.
It's also called selected works, and so that kind of implies like there's no intentional kind of album.
I think there's definitely at least like a imprimatur of kind of, this is music that I played over a long period of time, supposedly, and it's stuff that's just gonna be a kind of mishmash of this and that, and these are experiments, and that's not intended to be in its final form, or maybe it was never in a final form, and maybe the concept of a final form is something that I'm thumbing my nose at as well, right?
Yeah, fair enough. We're going to get to some of those details in the backstory. I have to also admit that learning more about this guy, he is a grade A asshole, but he's also a really funny artistic troll, who seems nihilistic and subversive and just has a fuck everybody attitude kind of about everything. And there is something a little bit intriguing about that.
I need some kind of drama in my music. And I understand maybe he was rebelling against this concept of drama, but music at its peak to me tells a story, instrumental music or otherwise. I feel like it has to tell a story. Even internally in a song, there should be some kind of drama, some kind of peak, something that makes it feel like a journey. And none of this felt like there was any point to it. You could have faded these tracks out at any point in the song, and it wouldn't have changed the overall character of the song. And that bugged me consistently throughout the week.
I know what you mean about the works like kind of not having beginning, middles, and ends. And that's cool for some stuff, but it builds to a place and it stays there. And it can fail to keep me interested. But again, it doesn't seem like that was the point either, to keep me interested as a direct listener who's like staring at it.
Right.
Because some of the songs are literally just 2 chords that repeat the entire time, or like 4 notes that just repeat the entire time.
And then that's what I meant about it not conforming to, if we had a set of rules, if we were to write down rules of what we think makes a good song, changes, drama, a beginning, middle, and end, a peak, a resolution, things like that. These have almost none of those. I would have to agree.
Yes.
And to be clear, I'm a far cry at this moment from essential, but I'm interested to see where the conversation goes. I'm just telling you that I did not hate it. I overall had a positive experience listening to it.
I think that, generally speaking, rules in art are dumb. And I'm on that same side, that rules in art are kind of dumb. I think that the best art is created by breaking the rules, but in an interesting way. And this seemed to break the rules in a very non-interesting way. It's almost like the point of the entire experiment was to be not interesting. And I couldn't get behind what I personally took away as the message. Because I kind of agree with you, Rob, that the message was a little bit of anti-conformity to music and anti-conformity to the rules of music. And it annoyed me that this was the way in which you chose to break those rules in the least interesting way possible. I'm not a big fan of dubstep or anything like that, but at least dubstep breaks the rules in a way that still has something I can sink my teeth into.
I don't think it was as well thought out as you are giving it credit for.
It's very possible also. Yeah.
From what I understand, it's like dude was just making these songs and playing them for his friends, and they were like, cool, I like that song. I like that song. I don't like that song. And he just picked random ones and put them on an album.
Well, we're going to get into all that in the backstory as well. But James, you have anything else you want to say here, buddy, in defense of Aphex Twin?
I don't know that I want to defend Aphex Twin exactly. I would say that it's more important about this particular record is it sort of touches off at least the like album length recordings of this guy's career. And I don't necessarily like his music very much, but I think that it did change a lot of how we think about music and produce music afterwards. And I mean, part of that I think is a little bit about the sort of technical pieces of how we're putting music together. And part of it's about the relationship that all of us have to, in some ways, sound, and the relationship that we have to sort of recorded and mass produced music. And I think that this marks the moment where music that's exclusively electronically produced begins to take the forefront of mass media. or mass marketed music. And from my perspective, the way I look at this particular record and his career more generally is it sort of is something like a march toward the logical outcome of something like the RCA Mark II. The RCA recording company undertook a huge project, a huge, really legitimately huge project to build what we would now recognize as a synthesizer that was electronically sequenced and output its music directly to disk via a scribe. That is, it outputted a recording master directly from the machine. The kind of concept that's embedded in that, right, is that to some degree, they're trying to take musicians out of the loop. They want almost the concept of a direct from the brain of the quote unquote composer to a mass market medium. And I think that this represents the logical outcome of that type of thinking. And it also really genuinely ushers in an era, which we're living in now, where that really is the dominant sort of form of how we go about producing music.
Well, let me ask you this, because you're talking about how this kicked off a starting point of this type of music, but this album was not very successful in terms of overall sales, and like 60,000 sales or something like that.
No, but for sure, this artist in particular and this album of this artist's set of works is definitively a watershed point for a lot of electronic music that comes after it. And that's mostly like the makers of electronic music, not necessarily the listeners.
Yeah, to speak to the sales thing, I mean, we'll get to it in the story, but it does, by all accounts, it's one of these records that, didn't sell that many copies, but every person who bought a copy was greatly influenced by it and went and made music. So it's way more influential by several orders of magnitude than its sales figures. And there are just some records in the canon that are like that.
Sure. I am not saying that I don't think that I'm going to vote yes on this being essential. I could get to it being essential. I can't say, though, that I really found any pleasure in this. And also, frankly, if I'm being honest, I didn't really even hate it. It just sort of left me feeling like nothing had happened. Like if my neighbor was playing a stereo quietly and my dishwasher was running, it would have been the exact same experience. It would have rolled off my back like that.
I suggest we go get into Aphex Twin's backstory, because there are, I think, many things for y'all to hang your hat on and comment upon. I think you'll enjoy learning about this fella. So now,
you got to save all the time for us really digging deep into the individual tracks, Rob. There's so much to get
that's
into.
The other thing. It might be an episode on the shorter side, because I don't know what we're going to talk about.
It's also really worth, though, digging into who the person is, right?
Yes. We're going to get into all that in the background. James, worry not, sir. And you can jump in wherever and add your thoughts. So, as I kick off this story, I should say that Richard D. James, the man behind Aphex Twin, is notorious for spinning tall tales about himself. So while a lot of what we're going to talk about here is the commonly agreed upon version of the story, truly it is anyone's guess which tidbits were completely fabricated by the man himself for whatever reason in interviews along the way. And interestingly, I heard a YouTuber describe him and say that Richard G. James was simultaneously representing three archetypes: the bedroom prodigy, the media savvy mythmaker, and the fuck everything contrarian. So that's kind of the Venn diagram we're working with this guy.
I see.
Yeah. I don't like two out of those three.
Right. I'm not saying you're going to come away from this story liking this guy. I'm just saying it's an interesting story. So
I want to say this early. I've built the record up to the point that I think that I'm giving it its correct place in electronic music history. I do not like this record. I don't like Aphex Twin at all. And let me just make that really clear. I don't like his music. I think
you're right. I was definitely confused about that.
I think he kind of sucks, and I think he's kind of a jerk. That said, I do think it's important, right? Like at the same time.
Well, he's definitely a jerk. I think the historical record is going to show that again and again. But yes, we're here to judge not that. There's plenty of assholes in the musical canon who have made plenty of essential music. It is about the essentialness of the material and should you listen to it. So also, I think the story is going to give you a sense of this. We're already talking about it. This guy is all about making antagonistic, discordant, uncomfortable music. So he has an antagonistic approach to press interviews. He clearly doesn't have much interest in talking about the songs themselves or his creative process. I heard him say several times that would be missing the point of music and creativity entirely. That said, even the stories this guy weaves about himself that are completely false, I think do give you a sense of who this human being is and how he thinks. Okay, we're going to get in here. We've got a patchwork quilt of anecdotes and possibly facetious biographical details to work with, but let's dive in. So Richard David James was born August 18th, 1971 in Limerick, Ireland. But his family quickly moved over to Cornwall, England, where he was raised. And for us non-UK listeners, Cornwall is all the way down in the western toe of the island there, if you can imagine that, way down in the southwest. So Richard starts out playing the house piano as a kid, but according to him, he quickly got bored of that, of what it could do sonically. So he starts messing around. He starts adding bolts inside the piano on the strings or bits of rubber or other detritus. Again, inside the piano, you could open the top, and if you place stuff on or between the piano strings, you're going to change the sound of the piano.
It's like a young John Cage.
Exactly. So side note, he certainly didn't know this at the time, but this approach was pioneered by avant-garde musician John Cage back in the, I think, 1940s, and is actually known by a term called prepared piano.
I don't really want to talk about John Cage, but I would say that he almost certainly knew who John Cage was, even as a kid.
John Cage is too commercial.
But we're talking about when Richard D. James was like 12. He probably did not know who John Cage was, but okay.
I don't know about that. I would not necessarily I don't take almost anything he says at face value at all. And the concept that you would not have heard of a prepared piano if you were kind of interested in doing crazy shit to a piano, even at age 12 or 13, seems unlikely. I had certainly heard of a prepared piano by the time I was 16. So
I think 16 is pretty different than 12.
I'm
going to stick with my story that I don't think he knew who the fuck John Cage was. James. Okay. Audience, you're starting to get a sense of what our band rehearsals were like. Back to Richard D. James. At age 10, he starts playing around with the family tape recorder, taping random stuff, sounds, and this era, if you will, culminates in him getting a synthesizer when he's 12, and of course, almost immediately, he takes it apart and starts learning about its inner workings. Now,
at what point did he get a synthesizer? That's the real question.
That wasn't until much later.
It sounds like throughout this period and well into his teens, he's not into traditional music at all. Perhaps this is not a surprise after having listened to the record, but he's not listening to the radio, according to him, or buying records or engaged with popular music. He's focused on making weird noises, which who knew that was a career? Anyway, he starts writing and producing music around the age of 14, according to him. Everything at this point is rapid, stuttery software beats. And he actually said this, and I thought this was funny. And by the way, almost everything about this guy's life reminds me of you, James.
We grew up together.
He says his early influences were hardware in nature. For instance, he cites a game loading sound on an early home computer called the Spectrum ZX81 as a strong influence on his sonic aesthetic.
Oh yeah, I mean the Spectrum ZX81 loading sound. I mean that's a thing, and that's not just him, right?
The fuck are you talking about?
Just to be clear to everyone listening, it's like a high siren whine followed by occasional bursts of static.
So early computers loaded their programs from tape, and in many cases they would run an audio head and an audio output while you ran the tape through to load the program into memory. The idea is that you have a sort of square wave on the tape that kind of represents the clock, and then you have essentially a series of overtones that are going to represent the game data. And running that thing into a computer actually made a sound at the time.
Hold on. Tom's asleep again. Tom.
Sorry.
So his point, and I like this, is that the people that owned the game or the computer spent hours and hours of their lives listening to that sound because it was on, like James said, every time the game loaded. And he's also like, hey, it's inherently more extreme than most extreme noise music can even be, in a way, right? And trying to load some different things on the machine would create subtly different types of noise. And he said, I always wanted to make my music sound like a danceable version of this loading noise.
Just the other day, I dropped a spoon down my garbage disposal and turned it on, and I was like, "Oh man,
That's it.
there we go. That's the new hotness. We gotta make that."
That's the stuff. We got to get more of this.
He also Richard claims that at age 11, he won a 50-pound competition for producing sound on a home computer with no sound hardware, saying that he learned to play around with the machine code and found some codes that retuned the TV signal so that it made a really weird noise when you turned the volume up.
Yeah, but that's not true, right?
That one sounds absolutely possible. I've been thinking about, I was playing, honestly, my kid's Game Boy recently, and was thinking about the voice synthesis in Chess Master on the original Game Boy, which uses a very similar technique to this, where you're essentially doing either pulse width or pulse code modulation to do. You're manipulating a completely sort of binary signal to make a far more complex waveform. This is like a common synthesis technique.
Like Mike Tyson's Punch Out. It's like ding, 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 rack, rack.
For all of you listeners, the really sad thing is that James actually got laid more than all of us in high school. And I don't understand how that's possible, because this is the kind of way that his brain works. He's like,
By his own admission, Richard is addicted to making noises, which sounds a little like someone we know who's also a guest on the show right now.
I wouldn't say I'm addicted. I can stop anytime. I can stop right now.
He even claims to have done an early DJ set, major quotes around that, using only sandpaper and a blender.
Yes, I say.
Yeah, you do see. But luckily you did not hear. He takes electronic courses in high school, and he's constantly taking apart, modifying his keyboards and other cassette recording devices he finds at the junk shop. And he ends up getting an engineering degree during university. And as a major project at university, he builds his own sampler. Though by his own admission, it only worked for a few weeks, and half the time didn't sample, but instead made its own weird noises, which of course he loved. And he says he still has a massive library of sounds from that.
Who among us has not built their own sampler, though? Come on.
Right.
Richard is coming of age in the late 80s. He's making tracks to play at his local club in the midst of his more traditional DJ sets, but not at all thinking about releasing this stuff. Around this same time, right, you have the development of techno music coming out of Detroit, which is a style that's heavily influenced by Kraftwerk and Giorgio Moroder and some Parliament Funkadelic mixed in there. And there's also another genre on the rise called Chicago Acid House. And interestingly, I learned this week that house music does trace its roots to Chicago in the early 80s, where DJs started altering disco songs to make them more mechanical and to last longer. And so acid house is a subgenre off of that, with more of that squelching synth bass, as far as I can tell anyway. So the main point is that both of these were new genres that gestated in the States and then made the leap over to the British scene around this time. And it's influencing what's happening in the clubs over there, where Richard is. So Richard's quick to say that because of where he grew up, he was, in his mind anyway, he was thankfully removed from the city and thus removed from a lot of creative influences. He credits that with allowing him to craft some of his own ideas about sound and music. But by the time he's a teenager and he hears Acid House, he is super intrigued, and that's when he starts buying up the records of that genre that he can find. So Richard said that at this point, his main goal, and maybe even his niche, was to craft songs that made people want to leave the club at closing time. Just a room clearer. That was the goal.
He's doing good. Yeah, excellent.
wow.
Yeah, he really was good at it. That's the thing.
No, I think he failed at that. This music is so inoffensive that you wouldn't even leave. You wouldn't even know.
Oh, dude, this isn't the stuff. This isn't the club clearers.
No, but if you turn this on, you turn the lights on, it's clear.
This is the chill out afterwards.
James is correct. This isn't really representative of that stuff, but that was the earliest stuff he was putting on and what the club promoters would ask him to put on. Clubs always had issues with people not leaving at night's end. And so they were like, we need some really abrasive stuff to get people out the door. Now, quick side note about this point and about what a sound perv Richard is in these early days. One of his earliest singles which I believe does qualify as a room clearer, is called didgeridoo.
Great idea.
Where it sounds like a didgeridoo on the recording. He did not use the didgeridoo instrument directly. He compiled the sound painstakingly from scratch.
I mean, if I see a didgeridoo, I turn the opposite way and start running. Yeah.
There are a few things less enjoyable to hear than a didgeridoo.
At this point, again, late 80s, he's involved in something called the free party scene. There are unsanctioned parties on the beach that go all night, cave raves and the like. And he's a local guy. He's getting gigs, but he seems pretty disinterested in anyone other than his friends and his local club goers hearing the music. But he is meeting with other like-minded music producers, guys like Grant Wilson Claridge and Tom Middleton, the former of which he ends up forming a label with called Reflex Records. And they together coined the term brain dance for their music.
I don't think I've ever heard that term. No, I don't think.
No, I don't think anyone outside of these two ever uses that term. But so interestingly, Reflex, which is spelled with a PH, is not where the first Aphex Twin releases land. Instead, rave promoter Mark Darby pursues Richard through the clubs for months and eventually gets him to sign a contract to his label, Mighty Force Records. And how does he do that, you might ask? By pushing the contract under his nose while Richard was tripping backstage at a gig.
Who hasn't signed the contract like that? Come on.
Classic move.
Classic record industry move.
Can you tell me, Rob, did Reflex with a PH or Aphex come first?
I want to say Reflex came first, but I'm not 100% sure. Because he goes by a lot of different aliases.
That makes his name way lame.
I, for one, have always thought his original moniker was Aphex.
I believe the first thing he ever released is called Analog Bubble Bath, and he released it under the Aphex Twin. But he also has lots of other aliases, and we'll get to the meaning of the name Aphex Twin later, but Aphex refers to Aphex Systems Limited, like an electronics manufacturer, somebody who was making hardware. So he pulled that right off of a label.
Okay.
Speaking of the various aliases he's gone by, he's also gone by Caustic Window.
Not as good of a name by a wide margin. Much worse.
Good. Power Pill, which I actually kind of like.
Not as good as Aphex Twin, though, I got to say.
AFX, Polygon Window, and the last one is Bradley Strider.
Really, really weird.
It sounds like what they would have told Keanu Reeves to change his name to in the 90s.
Yes. And little side note is that under the name Power Pill, he released an entire EP of remixes of the Pac-Man theme.
Which is actually pretty good for what it's worth.
Jesus Christ.
As far as his particular sort of work output goes, it's more of the listenable on the listenable spectrum.
The idea was that each persona could be signed to a different label. He wouldn't have to wait to release stuff, but it also sounds like UK Acid House. The scene was sort of a faceless movement by design, so it was a bit of a trendy thing to do to disguise your identity. So on to the name itself. We just said that Aphex Twin is partially inspired by the audio brand Aphex Systems and partly by Richard's older brother, who was born stillborn. According to him, again, not certain this is true or not, but it is the accepted story, his mother had named his older brother, the baby, Richard already, then suffered the terrible loss of a stillborn child, then later had a second son who they gave the same name to as a sort of tribute. And so Richard grew up saying that he felt like he had nicked his brother's identity and that he felt like his brother looked after him. So that was in tribute to him.
You know, I know somebody whose name was after a older sibling who had died before they were born, and that person changed their name in their mid-30s. That's a fucked up thing. Definitely don't do that to kids. That's a lot of freight to carry around with that name.
That makes sense.
Didn't like George Foreman named all his kids George.
All of them. Yeah.
That problem could be avoided, you know. If a couple died, it wouldn't, should name them all George.
That's a different thing, though. I think, you know what? If your dad is worth like $200 million because of some fucking grill, then you know what? I think that solves a lot of those problems. It pays for a lot of therapy.
So now it's the early 90s. Richard's been releasing a series of EPs under all these different names in this acid house scene. He meets up with a guy whose name I definitely can't pronounce correctly, Renard van de Paplier. He represents the R in a record label called R&S Records. It's a Belgian label, and they were excited to start a subsidiary. Dance music is on the rise. The subsidiary is called Apollo Records. He really wants Richard, so they meet up in Belgium, and they sort through a bunch of his old cassette tapes to compile this album release we're getting here.
Didn't we just have a listener write in about the Belgian music scene and about how dynamic it is? If Aphex Twin isn't any way representative of the stuff coming out of the Belgian music scene, I rescind my offer for a playlist. I do not want to hear it.
So the title is quite literal. This is a compilation of previously recorded material over a 7-year period. Everything was made by Richard D. James himself, recorded directly onto cassette tape. This speaks to what James was talking about earlier. Like, the masters were just sitting on cassettes, some of which had been passed around his friend group and played in multiple Walkmans already. It's a retrospective for a brand new artist.
I want to raise my hand here because, like, so much of this is possibly apocryphal. He was already fairly famous by the time this record is being theoretically produced. He's already definitely doing radio sets. He's already, for sure, done a couple of releases and is fairly well known in an underground scene, but like fairly well known for sure. It is definitely possible that he recorded this entire record in 3 months or something.
Or 3 hours, you mean?
It's totally possible. And it's really worth sort of noting that any or all of the claims about both his background, just generally, and about the recording of this particular record are possibly apocryphal.
I agree. Speaking of Richard's creation process, I heard him say, sometimes I just hit the keyboard in the way I'd like the rhythm to sound, and then I spend the next 4 hours moving the notes around where I want them to go.
You know, I got to tell you, I did not get a whole lot of sense that he was doing multi-fingered keyboard playing. I got the sense that he was doing the old Hunt and Peck, two fingers, like dit on the keyboards, and not impressed. Really, just not impressed.
No, he's not interested in learning an instrument. I heard another anecdote. It was about a later record where he wanted violin and cello on there, and he had no idea how to play either of those instruments, and he just spent hours recording his terrible noise that he made with them, then eventually got like a couple notes that were usable.
They just used those, edited them to shit. Oh, gotcha.
Like, that was enough for him. And I think that was the point of the exercise. That's my point.
Then you pitch shift them and you do a bunch of other things, right? This is,
Yeah, sure. Once you get the notes, you can do stuff with them.
This gets back to what I was trying to say originally about this type of music and like specifically what he's doing with this record. It's definitely not intended to be in any sense like traditionally produced music. And I think we hear that so frequently now that we take that for granted as like, well, that's just how a large percentage of musicians actually create music. We think of it that way now, but that was definitely not true at the time. That was not the case at the time.
Yeah, it's almost like texture focused or something, less than like some sort of like written music.
It definitely has like a Eno vibes.
Yeah, in his mind, he is certainly building off of the Brian Eno version of ambient music and trying to expand on that. But I think to James's point, it's partly about the act of creation, because he seems like he's also a guy that is against, he doesn't like to save any of his sounds because he doesn't want to ever go back to them as a crutch and use them again. He does a lot of these things improvisationally, and then it seems like he doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't like people listening to it almost. We're gonna get into that with some of his bigger hits. But okay, this album comes out in November 1992 with a very limited release. In fact, it's only available as an import for a while in England, where he's based, because remember, they printed it in Belgium. But critical attention and word of mouth helped make it bigger. How big, you ask? And that question, which you have so politely asked, brings us to our favorite segment. It's Aphex Twin by the numbers. So first number I want to throw out to you is number 6. This made it to number 6 on the dance album charts in the UK. It was a bit of a critical hit.
I don't understand how you can classify this as dance music. This doesn't seem danceable at all. It's very like you couldn't move your feet to this music.
You need to be in a sort of psychedelic or dissociative trance state.
Yeah, I mean this seems pretty easily dance. I mean, it's an even time signature and it's electronic.
You're overthinking it, Tom.
Maybe some of the most danceable music that exists. You know,
I don't know. No, I really hard disagree on that. I feel like dance needs stressed beats And a lot of the beats, it just seems like there's like no stressed beats in this at all. It's just kind of very, I don't know. It all seems so undifferentiated, you know?
To me, it's like market position, right? This isn't necessarily danceable music, but it was certainly marketed in the same segment as dance music, right? And I think that that's the way of looking at it that's maybe like the productive thing about him. He sort of is manipulating or thinking about the way that the dance music that he's already created has been taken into a particular genre and then is trying to build essentially the mind candy, right, that the people in that genre are going to go after, right? It's import only. It's like rare. It's unusual. And I'm not going to give you a copy of it. And I don't like it, you know, and I don't want to get involved with it. And don't even talk to me about this music, right?
Well, probably the people that were buying it were DJs. And let's just draw a clear distinction in this question of is it dance music with this is an era where as a DJ you're going to put this record on and you're going to put it against something else and you're going to extend sections and you're going to use it texturally. It's not just like hit play and let the song run its course. That's not what we're talking about, right? But okay, let's move on to the next number, which is 30K. That's the record sales of this album within about a year of its release. It now is estimated to be about double that at 60,000. So it is not a ton for a very influential album. This is more in everyone who bought it was highly influenced by it and made more music camp.
That is really interesting. I had no idea that number was that low because I feel like this in my mind is this is a milestone record in my mind for sure.
I mean, was this released on like CD?
I'm sure it was released on CD eventually, yeah.
Well, I don't know, but then we also have I have questions about sales because sales weren't necessarily meaningful, particularly in this genre at this time, right? This would have been something you're playing for yourself in Winamp for sure. This 100% is something you're playing in your desktop after you downloaded it from eDonkey or whatever, right?
In 92?
Yeah.
Okay.
Glad you said, was there anywhere else I could have gotten it back in 92?
Okay, next number is number 1. Fact Magazine, a magazine in the 2000s focused on electronica, pop, and hip-hop, called it the number 1 album of the 90s.
And hip-hop was included in there.
That's right.
The number 1 album of the 90s, including hip-hop music.
Wait, it was called Fact?
Fact Magazine, yes.
Okay, Fact. Okay, right. So just spewing out lies.
I think that might be the accent. Or like, that's totally fact, man. You know, like that's.
And just a little side note that a YouTube documentarian I watched was quoted as saying that this album has a reputation as the dark side of the moon of the 90s.
No, get out of here.
Yeah, I get
Enter the Wu-Tang came out in the 90s as well. I'm not tripping, right? Okay.
I thought you guys would appreciate that. Okay, we got a couple more fun numbers here. 26 is the next number. Now, in the 90s, after this record, Richard became an in-demand producer and remixer, but he never really took it all that seriously, and he had a release called 26 Mixes for Cash. Ostensibly, they were remixes of stuff like Nine Inch Nails, but really they were just completely original works that had almost no connection to the originals he was supposed to be remixing.
That's a good one.
And speaking of that, the next number is 0. Speaking of his remix career, Richard once submitted a Lemonheads mix that contained exactly 0 Lemonheads material on it. Richard said of it, "I didn't even bother listening to the song because I knew I'd hate it. Then I totally forgot about it until the courier came to collect it. So I ran upstairs and gave him the first track I found. Strangely, they never released it. They should have been honored. It would have sounded better than any rubbish song they wrote."
Holy shit. So did he presumably get paid for that Lemonheads mix?
Yeah, maybe he was prepaid. I don't know. Poor Evan Dando.
Dickhead.
And the final number is 4. As in the total number of podcasting hours we go hard in the paint on modern pop music in our most recent song battle, the best number 1 hit of 2024, available over at our Patreon page for the lowly $5 a month subscription. We talk Shabuzi, we talk Post Malone, we talk Kanye, and we do not hold back the torrent of harsh complaining on that one. So if you like the part of our show where we're particularly mean to music you don't like, then that one's for you. Sign up for a 7-day free trial today and listen to all 5 episodes of that. And regardless of how you choose to support us here at the show, we just want to say thank you for listening. Thank you for hitting the subscribe button, for leaving your 5-star review, for sending us all those lovely emails. It all matters, and we love you for it. So, back to our story. The legacy of this album and this artist, Aphex Twin, who thankfully does not appear again on the 1001 list, is that it's credited with getting indie kids interested in techno and house music for the first time. So in a sense, it's like considered a DIY version of electronic music that's not only pushing boundaries. This is what James has been saying. It's not only pushing boundaries in sonically, but also in this idea of how music can even be produced and marketed. Now, Richard himself, like we've said, seems to hate talking about the music and certainly hates giving it genre titles, but pretty quickly, young dance music nerds and critics started calling his stuff IDM, that is, intelligent dance music, along with other acts that were quick to follow, like Square Pusher. So, where does Aphex Twin go from here? Well, he makes a lot more songs, or tracks as he calls them, and he continues releasing music rapidly. Now, in terms of his process, we've alluded to a couple of these pieces, but he quickly grows into this world. I'm talking about post this release now, where he's against sampling other people's music. Kind of seems like he's almost against listening to other people's music. He's also against saving his sound patches. He thinks that if he did, they'd be a crutch to go back to. And shortly after this record becomes a critical darling, it seems that he also officially swore off using any factory-built gear. Everything must be deconstructed and rebuilt. And although I did hear him say that this is for any gearheads in the audience or on our show today, James, the one keyboard that he hasn't, in his words, butchered was the Korg MS-20. So I'm guessing he used that a fair amount on this album.
This one has a lot of DX7 on it for sure.
But what else does he do? He quickly starts licensing his music to commercials and makes plenty of money. He has no concerns about that whatever. He licensed some of his stuff to a tire company in the 90s. He's making bank. He truly does not give two fucks. And he starts moving his music into more overtly unsettling territory on his subsequent releases. Now, say what you will about this guy, but it does not seem like he stood still. And, we haven't mentioned it yet, but the way I think we probably all knew Aphex Twin coming into this week was the Come to Daddy music video. This music is quite different than that. I do think he's the kind of person that continues to evolve, right?
Yeah, I will say his two big things were Come to Daddy and Window Licker were his two big music videos. He really embraced the music video genre in a way that was pretty innovative. I recently watched that Window Licker music video, and it's like 12 minutes long or something like that. There's a good 3.5 minutes before any music starts at all, and it's really like a film experience or something like that.
Yeah, unfortunately it did seem like he even had qualms about how he was associated with these music videos and about the idea that images in music videos, or a single image, even if it's an iconic one, could end up replacing people's concept of the music. But again, he just doesn't seem to like success that much. Now, speaking of the rest of his output, I just thought for fun, I was looking at Richard's song titles, song in quotes, and I pulled a few here for a game I'm calling, is this an Aphex Twin song title or the title of a Zen cone used to help students achieve enlightenment? We're going to do a lightning round here. First up, we have Learning to be Silent.
Sounds like a Zen cone.
That is a Zen cone. You got that one correct. Next up, Start as You Mean to Go On.
Ooh.
Also a Zen cone.
That is an Aphex Twin song. Wow. Next up, we have The Waxen Pith.
Oh, that's definitely an Aphex Twin song.
It is an Aphex Twin song. You are right. And next up, we have Eating the Blame.
Oh, that's Zen.
That is a Zen cone. And the last one, I want to throw you guys for a little loop here. This is going to be a tough one. The last one on the list is Come On, You Slags.
I saw that song. I wanted to listen to it.
That's definitely a Zen cone. My Zen instructor, because I go to Zen class once a week.
He calls you a slag all the time.
I also wanted to mention that on the song Milkman, which is one of the only tracks, possibly the only track he ever sings on, and it contains the lyrics, I would like some milk from the milkman's wife's tits.
I have to be honest in saying that that phrase is permanently written on the interior of my brain, forever, which is really sad and kind of weird.
Takes a lot of twists and turns just in that one line.
It does. I would like some milk.
Okay, so I think we have to acknowledge that Richard continued to evolve. He made different kinds of terrible music throughout his continuing career. He's a real trendsetter. But keep in mind, by the later 1990s, electronica has become much more mainstream with acts like Fatboy Slim, the Chemical Brothers, and of course, our favorite here on the show, The Prodigy.
Yum.
So flash forward, and Aphex Twin, he's almost done his record contract, and in his mind, he's maybe done with making records entirely. He feels like he's made more money than he needs to live. And at the same time, there's this subgenre developing called drill and bass. These things are so terrible. I don't even know what that sounds like, but I know it sounds terrible.
Good. This is where the blender sounds and like the chainsaw sounds come in.
Well, this is what Come to Daddy is. So drill and bass, the premise is built around actively avoiding 4 on the floor or any sense of danceability and just having it be an oral assault. So that's what his big hit, Come to Daddy, is. He got the line in Come to Daddy from a fan letter. The fan letter ended with, I want your soul, I will eat your soul.
No, I'm glad, I'm glad he could make use of that.
Come to Daddy, better than anything on this album. At least something happens on that song, I gotta say. I'm not a fan of it, but something happens, yeah.
Well, when you pair it with the video, to be fair, now here's the tidbit I wanted to give you guys about Come to Daddy. It's not on this record, obviously, but Richard described it as a death metal jingle, which I thought was a fun thing. But many others have called it a parody of The Prodigy's Firestarter, which makes me like it more.
Yeah. I think that's pretty close to the truth.
Definitely.
So at this point, as we've already mentioned, he starts making really striking and creepy music videos where school children have his grotesque, distorted face on as a mask, and other horrific nightmare stuff happens. It is very memorable.
Oh, for the people at home, I'm wearing a Richard D. James mask throughout this entire podcast.
And so get this. This says a lot about the kind of guy he is. Come to Daddy becomes a hit. It gets to number 5 on the dance charts and number 9 on the indie charts, but Richard instantly hates that. He pulls it actively from chart contention when he sees it doing well. Like, he stops selling it for several weeks to thwart the song's potential rise.
This guy's a fucking asshole.
Tell me more about that. Do you have any insights on his motivation? What was going on? Maybe his diet at the time?
I don't even understand how you could do that, to be honest. I didn't know that you could do that.
I didn't know that was a thing either. Yeah.
Jesus Christ. He's like, I'm fine with selling my music to a Japanese tire company, but God damn it, if the fans want to buy it, no, it can't have that.
And I just, for some reason, I looked up what was number 1 in the UK when Come to Daddy was peaking before he pulled it from the charts, and it was Candle in the Wind 1997.
Oh, man.
So just play those back to back and you'll understand everything. Now, further down the line, Richard is still making music. His legacy is big. Artists ranging from Tame Impala to Linkin Park to Daft Punk all cite him as a major influence on their work, and perhaps the biggest one. After the massive success of OK Computer, Radiohead's Tom York was completely over guitar music and immersed himself in electronica, leading to their hard left turn in the album Kid A, and Tom credits Aphex Twin as a major influence, saying, "He burns a heavy shadow. Aphex opened up another world that didn't involve my fucking electric guitar." But what, you may be wondering, does Richard D. James think about Radiohead and about Kid A specifically? When asked,
Oh man, this is not going to be nice.
he is quoted as saying, "I don't like it. Really obvious and cheesy. I mean, I'm just comparing it to my favorite music, and I think it's terrible compared to that. But compared to all the shit, boring R&B tracks, it's probably okay. Compared to those teen punk bands that think they're anarchic, they're probably amazing. If you're only exposed to that kind of stuff, then Radiohead come along, you probably think they're geniuses."
There you go. That's like super nice for him.
That's almost a compliment. Yeah.
To be honest,
Fucking asshole.
despite being antagonistic to the press, or perhaps because of it, I found Richard to be rather quotable, and I've compiled a few such quotations into a game I'm calling Which Famous Asshole Said It? Was it Richard D. James, Aphex Twin, or was it Steve Albini?
Jeez, a lot of games today.
Life is a game. That's the sooner you realize that. It's quite similar to guitar solos, only with this, you have to use your brain.
That's Albini.
Yeah, it sounds like
That was Richard D. James of Aphex Twin. He's talking about programming his songs. I detest club culture as deeply as I detest anything else.
That's Richard for sure.
That was Steve Albini. complete asshole. If a record takes more than a week to make, somebody's fucking up.
It's definitely Albini.
Albini.
That was Albini. Next up, I'm a lucid dreamer. I can control my dreams. I make music in my dreams. I reckon I get about 70% of my stuff that way now.
That's a Phil Matarese.
Yeah, it's like Phil circa 2003. Yeah.
That's correct. I slipped in a Phil. Yes, that was Aphex Twin, Richard D. James. And one last one. I could just lock myself away for days and just get inspired by myself.
That's an Aphex Twin.
Aphex Twin.
That was Aphex Twin. Good job.
I have to say, the one thing that I find, I think, the most difficult about Aphex Twin is the fact that he made most of this music by himself. Despite the fact that I'm sitting here in a room full of gear that I mainly play by myself, I find it sad, to be honest. And I think that that's like the thing that kind of blows me away the most about it, is that he's able to sustain a creative endeavor by himself completely, and I find it slightly disgusting and sort of weird, right?
It's like a quarantine. It's keeping him away from the rest of society, James.
Okay, thus ends our backstory on Aphex Twin. Shall we get into some songs, gents?
That was all backstory. So we just made it to the like real part where we actually talk.
You were allowed to talk all throughout. I think you did talk all throughout, James. You gave us many electronical engineering lectures. Okay, let's go back and let's play a clip of the opening track on this record, which I believe is pronounced Crystal.
This is where Tom gets his Enya quote from, because it has little background vocal things happening.
So I am to believe that I'm not listening to a drum machine. I'm not listening to a synthesizer. These are like bird sounds he recorded in the woods and then manipulated.
Well, I mean, this is part of the apocryphality of it. Let me roll back the tape a little bit. There's a long history of people kind of lying about the instruments that they used in electronic recordings. And like,
so that people don't just go and make the same shit?
Both in theory, so they don't go and make the same shit. I think part of it is to add to the mystique, right? I'm thinking of my own album covers that I've like put completely wrong names for each one of the instruments, like naming all the instruments wrong on the back of the record intentionally.
But why?
Just to kind of fuck with people. It's just like, it's like a joke. It's like a thing that was already like an established practice by like 1992 for sure.
And yet you speak with such authority on what instrument people are using on the records we talk about.
The thing is, I think that there's part of you that like, there's part of like the psychology of people who are really into stuff like synthesis that you really want to capture something about a particular sound. You want like to be able to dissect it mentally and put it back together and reassemble it. That is definitely part of the mental process of making music like this, right? And I think that it's largely to make like a joke for those people who are actively engaged enough to know what it is that you are doing, to say that it's something that is not what you did, right? You're setting like a trap / making a joke that they will get and think is sort of funny, right?
But this is clearly some sort of like drum machine.
There's definitely drum machines on this record, for sure. Did he build them himself? Maybe. Did he sample something else entirely? Maybe. Did he do a million other possible things? Totally probable, you know? It's hard to say particularly or precisely what he did at any given point in any of this stuff.
James, what you're talking about is it gets to, I think, the thing that I hate the most about this kind of music, which is it tries to build itself up so much that it's so fucking hard and so complicated and all this work and effort went into it that you couldn't possibly understand. And then also at the same time saying that, oh, it's like a guitar solo, but you have to use your brain. It's like, motherfucker, you got to use your brain to learn how to play the guitar too. It's not that this is just like, oh, I pressed a button and I had a guitar solo. I think it comes from a place of insecurity about how, frankly, much easier it is to make this music than it is to learn how to play instruments.
I'll agree with that wholeheartedly. And I'll say there's a definite and distinct, and I'm talking about myself here now as I gesture to my fucking wall of synths in back of me. There's a sense of like, yeah, insecurity that you feel like you're not enough of a musician or something like that, right? And I think that this is also something that I feel like I've been responding to a lot personally. I feel like I spent decades like sort of trying to not develop technique when I should have been just spending the time to develop the technique. Is like, in retrospect, I'm like, I should have spent my time doing that. It was dumb to not do that. That actually informs a lot of the human side of music. The part that people actually want to hear is all about that human effort and not all about pushing a fucking button, right?
So the idea there, though, is that like a sort of isolation from developing technique would keep you raw, keep you unique.
I think the thought process behind it is that the technique is unnecessary. I'll exercise mechanical technique. I'll exercise, the ability to build a machine that can perform the technique for me, or I can more than that, like maybe the next sort of zoomed out level from there is the technique is not important because it can be reduced away from the music and still produce recognizable music, right? That's like another sort of like zoomed out level of technique is not important. Mm-hmm. It's ostensibly false, right? Like it's very clearly not true.
Yeah, but you have also, speaking about you specifically, but other people in your shoes, you just developed a different technique, as you just said, a mechanical technique. What you do, and other people like you, I think like Richard D. James, would say that they developed a technique in engineering. Not only sculpting the waves, but we all know, I'm even referring to like an engineer in a recording studio, where a lot of the job is troubleshooting things that are not working very well. Sure,
I'm not saying that is not what is happening. I'm saying I feel like there's maybe an insecurity around that. Is that somehow less valid than just learning to be very proficient at an instrument?
Well, I would say in music, and I have to be honest about this, I think it is less valid. And I'm saying that as a lifelong electronic musician, right?
Oh, I don't think so. I disagree. I think it's just different kinds of art. And so some people are artists that can paint, and some people that artists can paint with music, and you can take so many different approaches. I would say almost the opposite, that some like dork that spends all his day running scales and fucking reading sheet music and learning how to sight read or like singing other people's songs is the worst kind of musician.
Well, let me ask you this, Marty, and I don't mean this to be facetious. I mean this as like a serious question for you, Marty, but also the group. If I was to get really good at writing AI prompts to create music, would that make me a musician?
Sure. Yeah, of course. Is bowling a sport?
I think our lexicon just needs new words for things like what Tom is describing. But I tend to fall a little more on the Marty camp, in the sense that technique certainly is helpful at times, but it can also be a hindrance, and it's not a necessity to moving me with art. And we can cite a million outsider artists that
also suck,
achieve that goal without technique, and that also suck. Exactly.
But let's talk about this song, which did not move me at all, because I feel like that intro hi-hat kicked in, and I was like, oh yeah, like maybe there's something's gonna happen here, a little syncopation or something, and then just like nothing happened for the entire fucking song.
But it's easy. It's still easy to listen to. It doesn't require the kind of focus that I think you want to have with it.
Yeah, it's perfect for doing geometry homework.
Yeah, if you're like walking to the grocery store or whatever, it's
doodling
great,
on graph paper.
I agree.
Dude, I gotta be honest. I would have rather been alone with my thoughts. And that's saying something.
I thought he did get some nice moments in there. I agree this is one of the more atmospheric doctor's waiting room kind of pieces.
Yeah, no, actually, Tom, that's a nice compare and contrast too. Like, would I rather listen to this or be alone with my thoughts? I'll get back to you.
It's pretty dark in there, so it's gonna be pretty unengaging for me to want to just listen to my fears of death.
I mean, I think I'll take Crystal here, track 1. I think I'll take this over Alone with My Thoughts.
So I noticed it's the only one where he has to share writing credit because of the sample he used from a song called Evil at Play. And that's what's creating that singing, at least. When I went and listened to the track, that's sampled from another song. So he shares writing credit on this one. I thought it had some moments in it. I think there's a little bit of a paradoxical effect of this kind of music, where on the one hand, it is definitely background music, and I tend to almost find it easier to let my thoughts wander while I am listening to it, in a way that with other music, I feel I have to pay attention to it. On the other hand, I think when you do pay attention to it, you notice that there is subtlety going on. It's about these trancy, repetitive sounds that maybe very slowly get manipulated throughout a track.
Agreed.
Now, I'll admit, I don't always have the patience for listening to it that actively or for that long, and this album is long as hell, way too long for a one listen through of active listening for me, right? But I found it soothing. Like I said, I felt more relaxed, and I actually felt like I could get to a more deeper relaxed state in terms of my brain waves when I was listening to a track like this.
Yeah, but I mean, you're talking about like ASMR YouTube videos get you that exact same feeling.
But I mean, also more thoughtfully crafted and sort of more intentionally thoughtfully crafted ambient music will also get you there. I mean, and when I'm not even talking about like ambient electronic music, I'm talking about, I listen to a lot of Baroque guitar in the background. It's not like something I have to like sit down and focus while I'm listening to it, but whenever I tune into it, I'm perfectly happy about what's going on. I'm not necessarily super happy about what's going on at any given time in a lot of these tracks, but I'm not exactly off-put by it. Mainly what he's doing is essentially marketing maneuvering with a little bit of music on it. That is where I see the thing that's really maybe important about this record is, again, its position, not necessarily its content. I don't think it's the best by any means, even an ambient electronic record that had been made by this time, right? Like there were many better ones before this. What was particularly unique about this particular record, I think it's the positioning with reference to sort of the explosion of house and techno around this time. It sort of lit a match on something that already pre-existed to this and set it in a particular sort of market position.
I think that could be represented well on the next song. Rob.
Yeah, it's called Aegis Polis.
Sorry, go on, James.
This is this is my favorite track. This is my favorite track. I liked the aural space that it created. It's very chill morning after type music, and it reminded me of the things I liked about, for instance, an Air Moon Safari.
Yeah, this could be a good hip hop. If you took away the noodling synth that goes over top, it would be a good like hip hop song. Like I could almost hear someone rapping over it.
And are you talking about the vaguely melodic line that's in there, or are you thinking about?
Yeah, like a ding dong 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 dong.
That sort of reminds me of like Popcorn, which I think Aphex Twin later covers.
Is Popcorn a song, James?
Yeah, Popcorn is Gershon Kingsley. It's like 1970, I don't know, 1968, I think.
You're right. I heard about him when I was 11.
Oh, that Popcorn.
This song is just, it's super noodly. There's that noodly synth is not my favorite.
It has like a homemade video game soundtrack music, right? Like DIY game.
It's like somebody who was really good at doing something else and then just had to make the music part of it. Like,
Yeah. But around a minute in, there's this kind of like bassy thing. Then it starts kind of giving me like a Tortoise TNT vibe with that kind of like sub bass groove that starts happening. Maybe it's around like a minute 10 or a minute 20, but I kind of like that direction it takes, because other than that, it's just two chords that are repeated for 6 minutes.
I will say this: I had a much different experience with this song listening in my car versus listening in headphones. This does not seem like headphone music. This seems very much like you want some kind of very large speaker giving you this signal to make it a little bit more visceral. I do think, though, that my favorite part of this song, it's at like 2 minutes and 48 seconds in, and it just sounds like he hits a wrong note. He's been kind of like noodling. And then it sounds like he changes a patch and hits a note, and it's like, and he's like, oh shit. And he like holds off for 20 seconds before he does anything else. And I'm just picturing him like, oh, fuck. Like,
You hate him so much that your favorite part of the song is where he obviously fucks up.
no, that it humanizes it. It honestly makes it seem more like music made by a person, that somebody was like, oh shit, I fucked up. Okay, let me regroup. All right, I'm back in with my doop.
But not retrack, to be clear.
I know, but this is one of my favorite things to do. Working on electronic music is to leave the mistakes in. I love leaving the mistakes just there. Let that accrete in the track. I think it's important.
Nothing like mistakes accreting. That's what everyone wants. I know what you mean. Mistakes can occasionally humanize music and an artist. Certainly jazz musicians use that concept frequently. But my sense is that a guy like Richard D. James, and also James, our friend on the call here, as soon as it's out of them, they're over it as an idea. They're like, I hate this now. I've done it, and now I hate it, and I will never revisit it.
Yeah.
So the leaving mistakes in is kind of a convenient way to cover that particular opinion as well. Okay, let's move it on to another song, which definitely has a different vibe. It's called Green Calcs.
It's like sampled from RoboCop, apparently.
Oh, you were talking about the
Is it really?
I think so.
Like before the resonant synth that kind of makes you hate yourself starts.
That resonant synth is my least favorite sound in the entire world. It sounds like a boot being pulled out of mud or something. It's like,
Oh yeah, the real squelcher. Yeah.
This is the Aphex Twin vibe,
If I was really high and
Yeah,
dancing in a club and this song came on after like a slow banger, I probably would be dancing.
Yeah, the funny thing is, I absolutely cannot stand that synth sound. It like is physically uncomfortable to me. That the sucky sound, the one that sounds like a boot stuck in mud.
Oh yeah.
I hate it. And this is my favorite song on the album.
Oh, that's good. That's
Yeah,
good. Okay.
it really is.
This one has content. Is that kind of the idea?
It made me feel something, and there were like edges to it. Everything else just felt so sanded down, and I know that's what he was going for, but this one actually, it felt something listening to it.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I thought that, yes, also said the squelching synth bass thing. I don't like it. It feels overdone. This definitely jumps out as being a more abrasive track. Maybe sounds like where he's going. I wrote down that around 120, there's like a sound like a spaceship getting revved up, like you're pulling a cord on a lawnmower. I don't know. It's this kind of stuff that I really don't care for. It feels like experimental for experimental's sake.
This one I think is like more sort of what we'll see like as formal Aphex Twin later. This really gives the vibe of why I'm not honestly a huge fan of Aphex Twin.
The funny thing is, some of the later Aphex Twin stuff I don't mind. But this album, by and large, was just so room temperature glass of water for me that I couldn't sink my teeth into anything, love, hate, or otherwise. And so this is the kind of stuff that it gets at least a reaction. Like, I just want to feel something. I'm so dead inside. Just let me feel something for a second, please.
I'm so numbed by this record so far.
Tom had to cleanse by listening to like a Counting Crows album after this.
I had a good cry. Yes, that is true.
I actually listened to Dream Theater as a palate cleanse to this. I thought that was the exact opposite.
You were like, I need maximalism.
Maximalism
Right.
from all sides. Okay, let's keep it rolling here. Next song we're going to talk about is called We Are the Music Makers.
We are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams.
This is my favorite song.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's almost like krautrock. It almost brings me back to like some of the German kraut electronic music stuff that I like.
I thought this was like successful. This one and Crystal, I thought were successful songs. I could also, in a funny way, hear like Herbie Hancock playing over this, and it would have been released in like 1980.
It's not as mixed as poorly as some of the other songs.
But at least it is 7 minutes long. So, you got that
that's true.
going
You get to
on.
really live in there for a while.
Really settle in.
It definitely puts you in a trance. No, I like this one too. It samples Willy Wonka, right? That's where the line comes from. It's indicative of where our normal taste profile is. I do think it's just easier to have words in a song to hang on to, even a couple of them.
Yeah, his Roald Dahl got a writing credit on this one. Right?
This does feel the most like a traditional song, right? Yeah, this feels the most like something Medeski Martin and Wood would have done or even covered.
This one, to me, it really like hints at. I'm looking at this as the historical turning point that I think of this record as. The way that I'm interpreting the dreamer of the dream part is the dream that we got after this was so not what I was hoping for in 1996 or 1998 or whenever I'm first hearing this record.
Meaning like in Willy Wonka when they go through the factory and they all like get all fucked up.
Well, no. I mean, meaning like the sort of history, the electronic music that this builds to. We end up in repetitive music land for the next 25 years until now. And I think there's something super disappointing about that to me. In my mind, this particular song kind of feels like it's like teasing that about to happen.
Think about how limited you were with technology, though, at this time. Like, if you think of a band like Cluster, who did music kind of like this, I mean, they were using very, hand-wired drum machines, that really could only be repetitive, and this isn't too far removed from that to where now you can get on a computer and every single snare hit can be modulated and have anything you can add to.
I do think the date of these recordings, and I guess this ties into the lore and some of the apocrypha around it. But yeah, 1985 is a very early time for someone to have home DIY drum machine, right? Like that just wasn't reasonably accessible or cheap. But by like 92, totally different scenario, right? So like if these are old recordings, it is different. The origin story is different.
Yeah, there'd be no excuse making music like this now with all of the technological advances.
That's a good point. It's most definitely of its time, and the timing of it is important. And I think we should use that for our eventual vote. But first, we have one more song. It's called Delphium.
Those synth clap snares on the 2 and 4. Oh God, it's like dental torture.
I have to be honest in saying that I found it difficult to get to the end.
Yeah. This one I have just like a number 1 for my first point, and then like nothing written after it.
Yeah, there's a lot of blankness. There's a lot of blank notes under this one for me as well.
Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't select Schottky Seventh Path, which feels like an X-Files theme song precursor.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I thought of that, but actually you guys are hitting on why I did choose this song, because I think that we often try to go through these records and pick the highlights and perhaps one low light, things that sort of stuck out one way or the other. But this one to me feels like the downside of the record. There's nothing wrong with it. It's groovy. I guess it's danceable. It's chill. It's hypnotic, whatever. But to Tom's point of complaint, it all just kind of blends together. Every track goes on way too long. The whole album is such a chore to get through. Why is it an hour and 20 minutes long? Whatever the hell it is. Way too long.
Yeah.
Clearing the room, dude. Just clearing the room.
But we're also actively listening to it, right? Again, this is something you're slapping this up in the background like paint on the wall.
Definitely not intended for this. Richard D. James would not like this exercise at all.
This music is great if you don't really listen to it. Like, I'm sorry, that's not a great argument.
I think he was barely listening to it while writing it, right? So it's like...
There's one part of this song, it's the only thing that jumped out at me, and it's at 3 minutes and 12 seconds in, and it's only for like 2 seconds. There is this sound that I just feel like synth patch number 1 that showed up in every shitty techno song forever, and he does it for like 3 seconds and then it doesn't come back, and I'm like... Did he create that sound and then everybody copied that, or did he like twist a bunch of knobs and stumble on that sound and be like, oh shit, I can't do that, that's so fucking hackneyed, and then like
did
pop
he press
off
the patch number 1 button by mistake and then go back to the patch he was
it's like, oh fuck, I meant patch number 986. There we go.
Okay, I think we've gabbed quite enough and listened quite enough to this music. I think we should send it to a vote. Is Selected Ambient Works 85 to 92 by Aphex Twin an essential listen? Tom, don't keep us in suspense, buddy.
No. I'm sorry, this music is stupid.
Okay, good. Well said. And next up, we're going to kick it to Phil.
Look, I understand that Aphex Twin trailblazed through the guitar-dominated landscape of the 80s and 90s and paved way for yada yada. But for me, it's a no. I do like some sort of work that is downstream from this. Kid A is cool. I think Medeski, Martin, and Woods, The Dropper, is amazing and definitely has interesting influences from music like this. But this is very skippable for me.
James, let's hear from you.
Yes, this is absolutely essential listening for any electronic musician. And moreover, I think that it has a totally and absolutely important place in the decline of Western civilization.
Wow.
There is no Trump without Aphex Twin.
It's so true, though.
Okay. Well, it's quite a damning vote. But Marty, please tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm with James. I think any artist who is able to have any effect on the beginning of a genre of music should be on everyone's essential listening list.
Wow. You're kicking it to me for the tiebreaker vote. And honestly, even as I'm talking, I'm not sure which way I'm going to go. I think that Aphex Twin's, his attitude towards music, as much as the music itself, is what inspired people. So I think this is one of those cases where the backstory itself is going to convince me that this belongs in the canon.
Ooh.
So I'm going to say yes.
Wow.
That means James, me and James and Rob all get paid this week. and then you guys...
I'm going to take that 576 check directly to the bank.
You fucking wish. It's more like you owe $3.
Listen, I don't think it was an easy listen, although I did, as I mentioned, have an overall pleasurable experience. It's way too long. It doesn't conform to many of the things we would normally call good. But yeah, I'm inspired by what Marty and James said, that I think it sets something in motion that is important, and clearly it meant a lot to a lot of people. So just because it's not for me doesn't mean it's not essential. So Aphex Twin, buddy, you've received your highest accolade now. You can rest easy in your mother's basement. Okay.
Yeah, that actually is kind of fun about this story. Like, there's nothing anyone could say that he wouldn't hate.
I mean, that's the magic of it. He's a punching bag, right? He's an invitation to hate him.
Okay. Before we close the evening out, first off, I just want to thank our special guest, James, for bringing his knowledge of electronic music and ambiance generally and his thoughts about the decline of Western civilization to our show today. James, thank you so much, buddy. It's very good. Okay, before we close out the evening, noisemaker. Before we close out the evening, we have two things left to do. The first one is to check our listener mailbag. So I'm going to reach my hand in the old mailbag and pull out a few missives from y'all. First up, we have listener Mason from Austin writing, "Hey complainers, longtime listener, first time emailer. I first found your podcast when searching on Spotify for podcast episodes about Beck and happened to click on your Odelay episode. As a musician myself, it couldn't have been a more perfect hook for me as I enjoyed hearing about the sample origins, and from then I went on to listen to you complain about most of my favorite records, and somehow you didn't turn me off. Well done. The most intriguing and special part of your podcast is that a bunch of former bandmates and not yet former friends get together to share opinions on music. You represent all of us musicians who were in bands with our best friends in our 20s and moved on to straight jobs, but still cut up in a group text about music. I wanted to offer just two interesting facts that I don't believe have come up on your show yet. Number one, regarding the John Martin record Solid Air, the title track Solid Air was actually written about none other than Nick Drake, who was a close friend of John Martin. And I'm eagerly awaiting you to get into one of Nick Drake's perfect records, which I'm sure you'll find a tactful way to soil.
I did really enjoy that record. I was not at all familiar, and that was a nice surprise.
Yeah, I wasn't on that one, and so I actually don't know if that anecdote came up, but I'm going to assume that our listener did his homework and that we didn't mention that the title track was about Nick Drake. And by the way, I happened to look on the list. Nick Drake, all three of his studio albums are on the 1001 list, so he's bound to be coming up one of these days. Number two, you mentioned Ryan Adams recently covering all of Taylor Swift's 1989. Couple interesting pieces to that weren't mentioned. This came at a time when Taylor had refused to put any of her catalog on streaming. It doesn't make it less tacky of a move, but it is an interesting business move, meaning Ryan Adams covered and put this material on while Taylor's material was not available. Much love and keep up the complaining. Thank you for those details about Ryan Adams and John Martin. Super interesting. Love to hear those tidbits. Keep them coming, audience. Next up, we have Dan writing from Southern California, who writes, "Inspired by your State of the Union episode, I went to listen to the Beverly Crusher song, Just a Pretty Face, which is about Counselor Troy.
Oh, shit.
Having just heard Phil nominate Denny Diaz as the guitarist in his dream band, I was reminded that Marina Sirtis's husband was the singer in a SoCal Steely Dan tribute band called the Steely Jam Band."
That guy's punching way above his fucking weight. Jesus Christ.
That's a deep cut there.
It is a deep cut, but it is true. I did fact check it. Actually, maybe I should go back a step. Tom and I have a band called the Beverly Crushers that is a Star Trek The Next Generation tribute band. We just released a record called Enterprise. Go listen to it. Check it out. Marina Sirtis plays one of the characters on the show. That's the person whose husband we're talking about, who was in a Steely Dan tribute band. Sadly, this guy apparently played a show in LA in 2019, went home and died in his sleep.
Oh, fuck. I take back my flippant comments.
Anyway, the guy's name was Michael Lamper. He played on tours with several big bands. I looked some of this up. He was also in an Eagles tribute band called the Desperados.
Wow, way less cool.
Now, listen, I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but I feel like these tribute band names could have used some work. The Desperados, Steely Jam. I mean,
Yeah. We've talked about this.
Take it back to the woodshed. But anyway, thank you for that detail. Thank you for listening to the Beverly Crushers and giving us more Star Trek meets Steely Dan factoids to enter into our quivers. I'm sure we'll use those later at dinner parties and have everyone hate us. And anything you want to tell us about what we got right, what we got wrong, or just sending us a series of squelching blips and bloops via an audio recording, all of it is fine. Send it over to 1001albumcomplaints at gmail.com. Now, the last thing we need to do tonight before we sign off is get our homework for next week. So I'm going to pass the mic to Tom.
Thank you, Rob. I have the Albinator here. Full disclosure, I have been taking it apart to try to reassemble it to see if we can get the sound of ketchup falling on the kitchen floor that I can then use in some of my more understated works. But I'm going to see if I can get it to spit out an album for next week. So without any further ado, drum roll, please. We will be listening to... All right, another album about being understated and minimalist. This is 1984 by Van Halen.
Oh, heck yeah.
Very minimalist.
Diamond Dave era Van Halen. Hell yes.
That's a good one.
Very much looking forward. I'm sure that Aphex Twin was a huge Van Halen fan, right? Just
loved that shit.
Loved that shit.
Okay, well, we hope you tune in next week, and before you do, listen to Van Halen's 1984. Listen along with us. Join us in the conversation. And without further ado, for everyone at 1001 Album Complaints, I've been Rob.
I've been Tom.
I'm Marty.
I'm Phil.
Aboosh.